Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Nelson Lim, who is a professor at the University of Texas in Dallas. And he has a very interesting presentation for us today. And I'm very excited to have him here. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Nelson.
Sure, John. First off, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm a VFX CG practitioner and educator, and as you mentioned, I'm currently a professor at the University of Texas at Dallas, where I teach computer graphics, software development, and visual effects to budding creatives in the animation and games program. So the genesis of the talk was when I first started talking with you, John, at Side Effects about how Houdini was sort of my first CG software, and it taught me almost everything I know about CG. So this talk is really why I think Houdini is one of the best pieces of software to begin learning CG in, as well as how to effectively learn computer graphics in Houdini. And this all kind of stems from my own experience using Houdini as my very first CG software, and now my experience teaching hundreds of students computer graphics. So I hope you, the audience, find lots of value in this presentation. Thank you so much. Hi, and welcome. I'm excited that you're joining me, and I'm so thankful that you're joining me at this talk, Effective Houdini for Aspiring Beginners. There's so much to cover today. Why don't we just jump right in, shall we? All right, so there's three parts to this talk, and the first is going to be why learn Houdini. And then we're going to go into the what. I'll present you a roadmap of CG Houdini topics for beginners who are learning to create content in CG, in Houdini. And then we'll talk about the how, okay, which I'll introduce to you 6 principles to learning how to create content in Houdini and CG effectively. So let's start off. Who is this talk for? Well, if you are interested in using Houdini to learn CG, this talk is for you. If you have less than a year of experience in CG, well, this talk is perfect for you. I'm a strong believer that Houdini is one of the best ways to learn CG. And if you are starting quote unquote late in your journey, in your CG journey, or you're just not happy with the progress that you're making learning CG and Houdini, well, this talk could be potentially for you. If you're an educator like me who is teaching CG to beginners using Houdini, then this talk would be probably of some amount of interest to you. Who is this talk maybe a little bit less for? I mean less, I don't necessarily mean that it's not relevant, but less being that Houdini may not be your primary CG tool. And so if you're aspiring to be a character animator, a digital sculptor, or a texture artist, Houdini may not be your main tool right now. Who knows? In 2 years' time, that may be a different story. And it's not uncommon in CG that we often use more than one piece of software in CG. I use Houdini, but I also use Photoshop, Substance, Maya, Blender. There's a whole bunch of different softwares that we do use and for slightly different purposes. So I would encourage you, though, if those are your interests, I still think that Houdini is a relevant piece of software to sort of keep on the side, and it's very useful for learning a lot of other CG concepts surrounding maybe your particular niche. A little bit about me. I teach computer graphics at the University of Texas at Dallas. I teach computer graphics, animation, and games. I also do that on YouTube. And for over a decade, I created digital mayhem, chaos, explosions, and all that, and wrote CG tools for feature films and games. Well, I consider myself a quote-unquote self-taught CG artist, and Houdini is really, my first CG software. And I have to say that Houdini is the software that I would say, taught me the most of my CG knowledge and skills. I learned through using Houdini, And I think it is one of the most educational pieces of software when it comes to learning CG. So who is Houdini suited for? Well, if you enjoy CG because it is part science and part art, you like to combine both things together, Houdini is absolutely for you. If you like to tinker, if you're curious about the process as much as the result itself, then Houdini is for you. If you care about being efficient, Houdini is for you. And in fact, really, if the idea of doing things manually is such a chore to you, then Houdini is definitely for you. If you like to automate things and don't like to do things manually, Houdini is absolutely for you. All right. So why learn Houdini as your first CG software? Well, because number one, Houdini is relevant. Like as an industry it's an industry software in games, films, commercials, and virtual reality. It's used everywhere. Definitely, it's used a lot in visual effects work, but also in crowds, in cloth simulation, and in lighting as well. It's used in lighting. It's used in motion design work. It's used in so many areas. There's a huge demand for Houdini users, and really, there isn't enough Houdini artists out there or people who know Houdini. The other thing is you cannot outgrow Houdini. Houdini is literally designed in a way that people are creating things and doing new things in Houdini that you just cannot outgrow Houdini. So you will always be learning Houdini. Houdini is extremely accessible. It's free to learn. You can go download the Houdini Apprentice Edition, completely free to learn. If you want to create stuff commercially and make money with Houdini, well, it's inexpensive to use either. The Houdini Indie license, if you buy a 2-year license, probably costs about the same price as a monthly Netflix subscription. So it's pretty accessible, in my opinion. Not free, but pretty accessible. But definitely free for learning. And there's plenty of good educational resources out there, and we'll cover a little bit about where to find them in the what section. Houdini is also a clear box to explore any aspect of how CG works. And I'll share with you a little anecdote. So years ago, when I was trying to create a little effect of my own, and I needed to create some really simple shaders. Now that would have been completely impossible in the past because I would have to ask an R&D developer, an engineer to come and write some C++ code, no matter how simple it was, and compile stuff and make things work. What really blew my mind was when I was able to get into Houdini, into the shader network. It was just a bunch of nodes connected by little wires connecting them to each other, and I could create my own shader. I literally opened up the simplest shader that they had created. I double-clicked and went into it, see how they wired things up, and I created my own. And that was just mind-blowing that I could do it so easily and learn how other people do it. And I began to do like node teardowns where I open up nodes and start learning how other people do things in Houdini. And that is the power of Houdini. It is a clear box to explore any aspect of how CG works. Nothing is black box to you. If you want to see what's going on under the hood, you can. The other aspect about Houdini, and it's most talked about, is it's extremely powerful. The node-based procedural approach to CG just means that it's non-destructive, it's highly scalable. It's an approach that Side Effects has been doing since the 80s, and you can see in the last 10 years, this is really the future of where things are trending. Almost every major piece of software out there has been introducing some form of node-based procedural approach to content creation. I like to say that Houdini comes with batteries included, which basically means that there's a lot of things you can do in Houdini that you don't have to get out of Houdini to do. And you don't have to go and find or learn a bunch of other plugins to do things in Houdini. A lot of things come packed into Houdini, and ultimately that saves you a lot of cost as well. Houdini is also constantly updated. The developers are constantly working on it, adding new features, fixing bugs. On a daily basis, bugs are being fixed, and you can download the latest version of Houdini, and probably a bug that you found is already fixed. It's also packed full of the latest in CG innovation. So some of the latest stuff in CG that isn't yet going to most other packages, you can find it in Houdini already. And that's the reason why you can learn a lot about CG and learn a lot about being on the cutting edge of CG simply by using Houdini. So let's talk about the what right now and talk about this beginner Houdini CG roadmap. This is going to be what topics are relevant to this sort of beginners learning Houdini or CG, and I'll talk to you about a bunch of these topics. Now, they may not sound at all familiar to you at this point in time, but don't worry. I mean, this is sort of a roadmap that I introduced to you that you can then Google, go look at the Houdini side effects website. A great place to begin is their learning paths. That is excellent to begin with, and you'll find some of the topics I mentioned in there. You can also check out the Houdini YouTube channel. There is hundreds and hundreds of videos, tutorials in there, and it is such a wealth of information, and they keep adding to it. Just find any of those topics that I mentioned in this roadmap. Just look for them in the side effects website or the YouTube channel or the Houdini documentation, and you will find things to learn there. All right, so let's quickly go through this Houdini CG roadmap of topics. Beginner topics. Well, the first isn't really something that you'll find in Houdini. Well, the first is getting acquainted with the computer graphics pipeline, how the data flows from one end to another end, what are the jobs and roles of different people, basically what are the different tasks involved. And one of the best places to learn that is actually at Khan's Academy, where they have Pixar in a Box, where all the Pixar artists have come together and really try to introduce at a high level what the entire pipeline for CG is like. So I highly recommend Pixar in a Box by Khan Academy. Then next, get familiar with basic user interfaces, like how does the network graph work, how do you wire nodes together, how do you disconnect nodes together. You're doing that 99% of the time. And then get familiar with some of what Houdini calls context. There are only a few that you really must know at the beginning, and that's SOP. The SOP context, the MAT context, and the ROP context mainly. The other stuff you'll explore along the way. Get to know attributes. And attributes, groups, and the geometry spreadsheet, these are really, really one of the most important things. I would highly emphasize that if you understand attributes and how they work in Houdini, you will understand a lot of things in Houdini. All right, so attributes really important. Get to know all the attribute nodes. And then, part of proceduralism and all that is noise. Noises are so important. So get to know the mountain SOP, anti-alias noise, turbulent noise, uniform noise. Get to know how they look and how to use them. VOPs is Houdini's sort of node-based approach to visual scripting. And so a lot of people ask, do you need to know programming? No, you don't. You don't need to know programming. You don't need to know, sometimes they call it VAX. You don't need to know that. You don't even need to know Python. You can connect nodes together and do sort of a visual scripting with VOPs, and that is extremely powerful. You can stay there for a very long time and never have to write a single piece of syntax code at all. So get to know some basic VOPs, how to import attributes, export attributes, modify attributes with noise and RAMs. You can find some of that material on my YouTube channel, but you can also find it on SideFX's YouTube channel. copy and instancing. How do you copy geometries around? Explore the copy to points node. Again, I have that material on my YouTube channel, but the side effects YouTube channel is chock full of stuff too. Packed primitives, what are they? Get some basic understanding of it. Procedural modeling, I listed a whole bunch of nodes and concepts there. Those are all acquainted with modeling and procedural modeling. And I believe that on the side effects learning paths, Rohan Dalvi, who is a phenomenal Houdini instructor, has a series on procedural modeling there, and it's great material to learn. All right. Principal and surface shaders. So these are what we call uber shaders, and these are able to represent 99% of materials on Earth, whether it's something that looks like a piece of wood or plastic or ceramics or metal. Try to use these uber shaders and the settings that are on these uber shaders to create plastic materials, metal materials, car paint, glass, water, rocks, wood, leaves, cloth, silk, maybe, and understand what those materials do to achieve a particular look. And then get to learn lighting, learn what is exposure, what makes something too bright or too dark, color theory, learn about complementary colors, learn about the moods that different colors make you feel, learn about the triad of colors, learn about 3-point lighting. It's basically studio lighting. What's a key light, what's a fill light, what's a rim light. Learn about how people use an image taken of an environment, of a real life environment, and you can use that to recreate the lights in digitally that mimics that environment, and so your CG objects look like they would sit exactly in that environment. It looks super realistic. Learn about cameras and composition. So learn about the rule of thirds, composition techniques like that. Learn about the focal length and aperture on lenses and cameras, how that works, how that changes your image, and how that creates depth of field. And a good example of this is right now, if I were to put my hand over here, oops. Let's see, maybe it's not working, but you can see that my background is blurry, and that's depth of field, right? So that's a classic example of depth of field. And then get to know rendering, understand what's motion blur, because it happens every time something moves, whether it's the camera or objects. Get to know what are primary rays. How does the renderer shoot a ray out into the scene? When that ray hits something, how it bounces off, and how that entire process comes back to tell the computer what is the color of a pixel. And so there's a whole lot of concepts there. Learn about compositing, how compositing is kind of like Photoshop, but on steroids, because you do it across a bunch of images. So learn how the merge operations work, how the crop make things glow, change the color of things, because that is a important process that happens in CG. And then almost at the last, when you've understood all of these concepts, explore VFX, explore how simulations work, like particles, how to create rain, snow, dust, fairy dust, sparks. Explore some vellum, where we learn a little bit about cloth, swaying grass, creating balloons, creating metal bending, or rigid body dynamics, which is hard things that don't compress, they are not soft, when they fall, roll, collide, when they fracture, and work on objects that are no bigger than a statue. That would be pretty controllable for a beginner. So I know we talked a lot about the what's, and then you're asking, okay, that's a lot of topics, but how do you learn these topics? So I'm going to talk about these 6 principles to learn how to create content in CG. And the first principle is to always begin with the end in mind. So what do I mean by always begin with the end in mind? If you took all of those topics and you just said, I'm going to learn rendering today, and I'm just going to render, and learn all the different aspects of rendering, it can be pretty boring. So what I suggest for creative people like us is to create a project, something to make, something to copy, and make it something specific. So it could be, you want to create an animation of dropping coins or rolling marbles, and just rolling marbles, you'll have to create shaders that simulate glass, for example. You have to learn some rigid body dynamics on how things roll. And you have to learn rendering and compositing, and maybe you have to create a ground. There'll be collision. There'll be things for you to learn, but keep it small and keep it simple. All right. Now, if you already know your niche, meaning that I'm not sure that you are actually much of a beginner, but if you know that what you really want to pursue, like if you want to be you want to pursue VFX in CG, or creature effects, you want to create hair, fur, that kind of stuff, then go out there and learn and read about everything you can know about that particular niche. So go find out who those artists are. Go look at the portfolios of artists who create fur, create VFX, or the reels. Go read about as much as you can about those roles. Go look at the job descriptions on the websites and what do they require, what do they need you to know. Begin with the end in mind, so you know where you're aiming towards, and then you can work towards creating projects that heads you in that direction. But don't worry, if you don't know your niche, not a big deal. Principle 2 is going to help you. Principle 2 talks about action leads to clarity. And a lot of times when I speak with beginners, they have no idea what their niche is, what they're passionate about, and that's completely fine. Just know that when you don't know what your niche is, don't get overwhelmed, don't get paralyzed, just take action. Because once you take action to do something, to learn something, it leads to competence. You now know a little bit more than you used to, and that knowledge is going to inform you about what other steps are available for you out there, and it's also going to inform you about what you enjoyed or what did you not enjoy about that action step that you just took. And so action leads to competence and knowledge, and competence and knowledge can lead to passion and finding your niche. So I highly recommend when you start off to work in short sprints. What do I mean by short sprints? When you work in short sprints, you just want to maybe at the beginning, set yourself projects that will take no longer than a week. If you exceed a week, drop the project, move on, try something else. It sounds very weird at the beginning, but at the beginning, you're just trying to explore things. You're trying to explore things, expose yourself to different things. You're not necessarily married to any one thing. As you go along the way and as you try different things, you'll get better. And as you get better, you can increase your short sprints to 2 weeks instead. And when you're at 2 weeks, decide at the 2-week mark, do you want to pursue this particular discipline a little bit more? You want to learn a little bit more about this particular topic, or you kind of had enough time to move on? So treat it a little bit, treat it a little bit like a spiral staircase where you're just trying to go around and build little bits of knowledge. You're never really staying at one spot for very much too long at the beginning, and then slowly let your competence and your knowledge and your passion inform what you build in what you start to tackle in these longer sprints. Okay. So I also recommend that you journal moments of clarity. Like, what did you enjoy about this, or what did you really loathe about this particular short sprint and this particular week of doing things? And from there, you get kind of gain self-awareness and insight. And it's very important as CG artists to gain self-awareness and insight as we learn about CG and as we delve into Houdini. Principle number 3, put your blinders on. I'd say ignore social media because a lot of times, I don't know for you, but I definitely feel it. Social media can be pretty overwhelming because you see so many great artists out there working on all those different things, and you think, man, I think I need to learn that. Oh, I think I need to learn Pyro. I think I need to learn Flip. I think I need to learn Vellum. I think I need to learn Hair. There are so many things to learn. So don't let social media derail you. Choose a particular topic, take any action, take like really any action, and work at it, right? And it's okay to not know anything because you can't know everything. It's better to don't chase 2 rabbits at once. It's always better to chase 1 rabbit, sort of tame it, domesticate it, control it before you go chasing the other rabbit. And it's okay. I used to tell people in particular a little anecdote, and that's that there's a story about the donkey, and there's a story about the donkey. And there's a donkey, and he had hay in front of him, and he had a trough of water in front of him. And he couldn't decide because he was both hungry and thirsty whether he should take the hay first or drink water first. And because of that, the donkey eventually died of thirst. Now, what's the moral of the story? The moral of the story is it didn't matter if the donkey drank water first or ate the hay first, because there was time enough to do both. All right? So don't worry about it. Just take action, do something put your blinders on, and ignore what everyone else is telling you to learn or do something else. Finally, ignore your inner critic. If you're a perfectionist like me, then you realize that perfectionism is the mother of procrastination. And a lot of things that we procrastinate on is because we think we need to get it perfect. You don't have to have the perfect tutorial. You don't have to have the perfect materials, resources, or the perfect version of Houdini in order to do something. All right, so ignore your inner critic. Just go ahead and do it, because if anything's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. This is really important. Design a habit to create daily. So principle number 4, design a habit to create daily. And the concepts taught in this is not really mine. It's actually from James Clear, the New York Times best-selling author of the book called Atomic Habits. And he says, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So if you want to learn Houdini and content creation, using Houdini as a content creation application in CG effectively, you have to design a habit to create daily. All right, and how would you do that? There's these 4 parts to creating a habit. Number 1 is the cue or the trigger. So you need to make that cue or trigger obvious. And one of the most obvious ways to do it is to set your alarm at a particular time every day that rings. That's Houdini time. That is Houdini creating time. Make it obvious. All right, craving. So make it attractive. If your desk is cluttered and you don't enjoy being in your room where your computer is, to work on creating content, work on learning CG, you're going to have a hard time designing a habit to create daily. So make it attractive, all right? Third, response. Make it easy. Now, if you think that you have to create for 3 hours every day, that's not easy. You're not going to make that habit. So make it an hour, or make it even less than an hour. Make it 15 minutes. In fact, force yourself to only create for 15 minutes every day. You will find that it's very difficult. Once you start creating, you'll probably create for more than 15 minutes. But if you've done 15 minutes, you have completed. You have created, you can check the checkbox, you're done. All right. So make it easy. Make sure that whatever tutorials that you want to do, you've already lined up a list of it and you know what's the next thing that you're going to do. Don't try to search for things during that 15 minutes because it takes 15 minutes to search for things. Finally, this is very important, is the reward, because this is what makes you come back tomorrow to do this habit again. And that is, you have to make it satisfying. So initially, when you don't have a lot of competence in creating CG content in Houdini, it's not going to be very satisfying in and of itself. So you need external rewards. So what can that external reward be? Well, it pretty much depends on you what the external reward can be. Maybe you love ice cream, so treat yourself to some ice cream every day. If you did your 15 minutes of creating content in Houdini, maybe it is a episode of your favorite Netflix show. Maybe it is a cup of Starbucks coffee. Whatever it is that tickles your toe, try an external reward. But you know what? As time goes, you will eventually find that it is satisfying on its own to know that you have created something in Houdini as a CG artist. The art that you create, the things that you create, they are satisfying in and of themselves to be a reward that tomorrow you're going to come back again for 15 minutes to keep working on your craft and keep learning and creating in Houdini. So we talked about designing a habit. We also, for principle number 5, we want to learn the principles, not the steps. So what do I mean by learn the principles and not the steps? It's kind of like, another way to say it is focus on learning the whys and not the hows. So if you remember paint by numbers, how many of you have seen paint by numbers? If you've seen those paint by numbers kits, you can get a kit. There is a number on every single color, and you just dip your brush on that particular number and you paint all of the sort of areas that have been marked by that number with that particular paint. And so at the end of it, you can create something that looks beautiful. But painting by numbers creates beautiful things, but not things that you can repeat yourself, not things that are original from you. So that's what happens when you learn the steps, but not the principles, right? So when you go out there, good resources explain the why and not just the how. So look for resources that explain the why and not just the how. But fear not, if you've got a resource that's less than perfect, that is a paint by steps tutorial, fear not, look at the notes that they use. Whatever you don't understand, go read the docs, read the Houdini docs. They will tell you how, that note works. Oftentimes, there are even examples in the Houdini docs that you can then open up and check in Houdini how Houdini uses those things. Go look up the Houdini YouTube channel. Go check out how those nodes are being used. So fear not, read the docs. If you don't understand, if the resource doesn't explain why, you can still learn why on your own. But very important principle is to learn the principles, not the steps. Lastly, principle number 6, find community. Now, when you learn CG, find a community where you can journey with other people on their CG journey, right? People who can celebrate your wins with you, people who can encourage you, people whom you can just sort of form an accountability with. And that's super important. And in this digital age, you can do it in the side effects forums, the Odd Force forums, the Houdini Discord channels, and the Houdini Facebook groups that are available out there. So many options available to you. If you are in a school, look up if you have a animation or a visual effects student group. Go seek out all the other CG students in your program, work with them, get to know them, collaborate with them. And last but not least, join the Effective community. And the Effective community was created by me for aspiring effects artists, technical directors, and technical artists who are aspiring and learning and just on their way in learning this CG craft, and they want to be in an environment with other people just like them and they want to learn. Join the Effective community, and you can find it at nelsonlim.com/effective. So finally, I wanted to thank you for taking the time with me. I hope that this has added value to you, that this has helped informed how you can learn Houdini and be more effective as an aspiring beginner learning how to create content in Houdini as one of your first content creation application tools. If you want to connect with me, you can always find me at Instagram, Facebook, and I think my handle is at I am Nelson, or you can check out my YouTube channel, Nelson Lim, or my website, nelsonlim.com. So thank you once again, and once again, my best wishes to you on your CG journey. Take care and bye-bye.